Uh, Next speaker is Maya Gonzalez. And Maya Zuni González is a public historian and a PhD student at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Their research examines post-Holocaust Yiddish language activism and collective memory in the United States. In addition to teaching, Maya currently works as a librarian for the Institute for Holocaust, Genocide, and Memory Studies at UMass Amherst. Their talk is called Yiddish Zines and the Usable Past in Contemporary Yiddishism. Take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Perellis. Let me share my screen. And while I'm doing so, just send some kudos to Hannah for that amazing presentation. I'm sure we're all reeling. But now it's time to talk about zines. Flash forward a few years in terms of our material culture here. Um, so my talk is titled Yiddish Zines and the Usable Past in Contemporary Yiddishism. Um, a lot of the zines that I work with were made by folks who are in this room, so that's very exciting for me. I'm here to start a conversation, and I'm really looking forward to the Q&A and the discussion that we have afterward, considering that this is not just a project I'm working on, but something we are all building collaboratively. Um, so to start, as always, we gotta ask, what's a zine? A zine, which you'll see an example of in the bottom left-hand corner, is a DIY style booklet. So it's something that anyone can create from a single sheet of paper, as long as you have, a marker and a pen or a pen, you can create a zine. But the aesthetics and the form of exactly what that looks like change diverse. They're very, very diverse across different zines. So that's what we call the DIY style. It can really be anything. But often these booklets are printed in limited runs. So, for example, the zine you see here was created collaboratively at the Workers' Circle trip to Yiddishland this summer in a workshop that I hosted. We did a collage project over the course of the week and then distributed the zine digitally, but there are physical copies out in the world, but only a few, so a limited range, a limited quantity. Um, Zines are self-published, which means that every process of the end product is usually done by one person or a group of people who all equally participate in different parts of the project, um, meaning the writing, artwork, editing, printing, circulation, etc., happen by the same folks, and usually without any monetary, there's no money exchanged for the labor that goes into a zine. And with that being said, there's no monetary labor, or there's no monetary reward for a zine. That's because you don't get money for making zines either. Zines are not commercial products. If money is exchanged for zines, usually it's because they are raising funds for a mutual aid or some kind of donation. But scholars agree that zines usually you lose money on if you're a zine maker. On a more sort of abstract level, zines are made by and for a community, and that community can be united by their shared ideology, identity, cultural, ethnic, whatever that may be, or an interest. Um, and as I've already started to mention, readers, authors, artists, and editors are all equal and active participants in this form of cultural production. No voice is privileged over another, and the ways that zines circulate are not necessarily based in commercial interests or the interests of an editor over the person who, wrote the zine themselves, etc. Okay, so my project, sort of at large, examines Yiddish zine culture. Zine culture is just the way that we describe anywhere where zines are circulated. Um, Zine culture in general, most scholars agree that it kind of starts in the 1970s, but we can trace it back far, far before that. But Yiddish zine culture specifically, I argue, was born in the 1980s. During the period that I study in my dissertation, Yiddish cultural activism became a prominent aspect of Jewish youth subculture at large. With the establishment of Yiddish language programs and university offerings in Yiddish studies in the late 1960s, these young Jews were the first post-Holocaust generation to experience Yiddish primarily outside of the home and with other young people. You're familiar, I'm sure, with these stories. They rescued Yiddish books, they expressed their queerness through Yiddish, they revitalized klezmer music, and they revived secular Jewish organizations guided by their Yiddishkeit. And of course, they made zines while they were doing those things. So the talk today will just focus on zines mostly from the past 10 years, since this is more of a memory project than a historical one. So to frame my talk today, I'd like to define a few things. First is the framework that I'm applying to read these zines, and that is the usable past. So in 1918, literary critic Van Wyck Brooks coined this term, usable past, to describe a set of historical points of reference selected by a group to shape contemporary action within that group. And the thing that's important to know about the usable past is that the way that we talk about our past tells us a lot about our present. Um, so if you asked, for example, any Yiddishist in this room to tell you the history of Yiddishism, we might all tell pretty different stories, but they might have some similar reference points. And those are the ones that shape and make up our usable past. And Robert Bella, in 1985, a historian, expanded on this term, usable past, to argue that the usable past works to establish identities within a community of memory. Communities, he writes, have a history. In an important sense, they are constituted by their past. And for this reason, we can speak of a real community as a community of memory, one that does not forget its past. In order not to forget that past, a community is involved in retelling its story, its constitutive narrative, and in so doing, it offers examples of the people who have embodied and exemplified the meaning of the community. So in my study, I argue that Yiddish zines are tools for storytelling and building this usable past within a global Yiddishist community. Their similarity to the book, the traditional form associated with storytelling, grants zines authority and familiarity among readers. With zines, stories gain value not through commercial means, but through their applicability and their accessibility to the audiences that they serve. They reveal the shared history, values, and commitments of the contemporary cohort generation of Yiddishists, who I'm roughly dating from the 1990s to the 2020s, as a community of memory. Zines tell and retell specific stories, uplift specific individuals, and so on, in order to create a shared history. This is their usable past. And in creating that past, Yiddishists place themselves in a lineage of diasporist organizing, apply diasporist values to their work, and discuss diasporist ideology as it applies to their present. And I might be preaching to the choir here, but I want to emphasize that none of this is preordained. It's not obvious from the point of the past that diasporism is the sort of uniting factor amongst the way that we Yiddishists tell our histories today. And so a few more definitions just in case. Diaspora, we need to define in order to talk about diasporism. Diaspora is the way that you describe a population who's dispersed outside of its geographic place of origin. And diasporism is an ideology built on the belief that Jews can thrive in diaspora without returning to a biblical homeland in Eretz Israel. And I know this is like a woefully brief definition, but you'll see more as we go on what this looks like in practice. So, where else to start but with Doakite, this sort of sign, symbol for diasporism as a whole. Here we have two zines, both titled Doakite, which is why I've paired them together. And Doakite refers to this Bundist concept, the Jewish Labor Bund of Eastern Europe. This Bundist concept, roughly translated as here-ness. Do here, a kite, or kite-ness. As Mindel Cohen describes it in her dissertation on the term, the Bundist meaning of Doakite was, quote, an investment in Ashkenazi culture, in Yiddish, and in the possibility of continued Jewish life in places like Poland, Lithuania, Ukraine, and Belarus. Despite the poverty, oppression, and the lack of autonomy that Jewish communities faced in Eastern Europe, diasporists sought to struggle for rights and security in the places they already lived, rather than follow territorialist or Zionist movements suggesting that they leave for a new nation state outside of Eastern Europe. So, um, Doakite 2014 was written by Yiddish cultural activist and writer Rosa Daniel Lang-Levitsky to address what Lang-Levitsky viewed as the dishonest use of the term in progressive Jewish nonprofit spaces. Lang-Levitsky is contesting the use of the past for political purposes that they argue are standing on false ground. They introduced the term Doakite through a radical ideology-forward history of the Bund, which we might call their usable past, um, who Lang-Levitsky says adopted the term Doakite to, quote, reject a separation between the local and the global, insisting on their constant interweavings. Doakite is a declaration that what happens here is shaped by structures of power that must be confronted here, but cannot be dismantled through structures here alone, end quote. So their definition is clearly shaped by a desire to motivate Jewish progressive organizations in the 2010s to consider how global issues and specifically the colonization of Palestine are relevant to domestic organizing. The form of the zine itself lends itself to this message because it's printed on a single sheet of paper and easily distributed at a march or a protest in New York City where it was first published. You'll also notice the now iconic poster in the right-hand corner. Dorten wo wir leben, dort ist unser Land, which they translate as there where we live, there is our country. This poster, which we see time and time again throughout the zines, is worth just taking a brief look at as a primary source in its own right. It's a poster from 1918 calling on comrades and citizens of Kiev to vote for Bundists in their local elections. At the bottom, it says, a democratic republic, full political and national rights for Jews. It's interesting to note that the Jews of Kiev had national autonomy in Ukraine at this time, and thus they were able to play a role in Ukrainian politics and the national government, which was centered in Kiev. So this poster would have likely been seen by thousands of Yiddish speakers. Maybe thousands is a bit generous, but the population of this city was a third Jewish at this time, so lots of Yiddish speakers would have seen it. Today, it's a ubiquitous sign used among Yiddishists to symbolize what looks a little bit more like cultural diasporism rather than political diasporism. And Lang-Levitsky is trying to push its use back into the political. We move on to, I'm worried about time. I can't see the chat. Okay. So on the right-hand side, we see another zine from 2024, so 10 years later, published by the Montreal-based Yiddishist Carl Ponthieu Stern, whose zine takes a slightly different approach to the subject. It is a participatory pedagogical approach. It's an interactive zine that has illustrations, games, and prompts that, quote, entice you to think about here-ness. Use this zine as your inner child would. As a physical object meant to be colored on, played with, the zine itself encourages embodiment and mindfulness, which are more abstract values grounded in Doakite, and also sort of separated from their historical context or political context. Furthermore, the reader and the author become the same person while using the zine. They are sharing authority over who writes the usable past. Okay. Up next, we have the zine by Boston Workers Circle organizer Zohar Berman, who incorporates Yiddish language and history into an English language discussion of radical diasporism, which is an evolution of diasporism by Melanie K. Kantrovitz, who was the founding director of Jewish, I haven't written it down, Jewish economic and racial justice. Something happened with my with my notes. So this is a mini zine, meaning it's printed on one sheet of paper and it's folded into a booklet. The cover page, which you see here, features a public transportation map, which is tailored to the zine's local Boston-based readership. It's a localized visual of diasporism. Berman uses the zine at the Boston Workers Circle's shula or Sunday school to raise children according to this specific usable past of diasporism. They explore diaspora languages, fight oppression in tandem with other marginalized groups, develop anti-racist, anti-capitalist, and trauma-informed skills. And it's interesting to note how Berman builds modern lessons out of diasporism, applying modern terms and values to a movement over 100 years old, and asking its audience to look again to global Jewish cultures and not focus on the specifics of Eastern European life. All right, and I think I'm out of time. Okay, so I'm gonna finish up. Um, which is really too bad because my next slides were actually about our lovely friends, Sarah Biskowitz and Cameron Bernstein's Yiddishistka project. But I'm going to have to conclude, and maybe we can go back during the questions. Okay, so in conclusion, Yiddish zines are an expression of a diasporic Yiddish subculture that is worthy of academic study. I'm happy to talk more about this during Q&A. Yiddish zines reveal the chosen history, values, and commitments of our contemporary cohort generation of Yiddishists as a community of memory. And in creating our usable past, Yiddishists place ourselves in a lineage of diasporist organizing, apply diasporist values to their work, and discuss diasporist ideology as it applies to the present. Okay, thank you.